We're from ThoughtWorks. Thanks for the introduction. I think we're the oddbods in the room. It's very technical here. So we're both non-developers. I'm a designer, essentially. We've come from obscure paths, and we'll talk about that later. And Ian?
Yeah, so I have a project management and sort of product management background.
Yeah, and so we kind of come together as an interesting pairing today, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through. So first of all, I just wanted to touch on what is a product. So these days, we're working in software and technology, and there's an interactive element. So, you know, products aren't necessarily just the thing that you buy and take home. It's a thing that tells you things and reminds you and interacts in some ways and has some data that connects to the cloud, and you can customize it, and it connects to a printer and other things, and it broadcasts to other things. It's self-aware in some respects. It's got social, and everything has to have social now. Right, sweet, right? But this, it's not a product anymore. So I'm looking at this and saying, well, that looks a bit like a service, right? So to me, it's services wrapped in little packages. I think that's a helpful way to look at it, and we'll talk a bit more about that. So the other question is, what is innovation? So we're talking about product innovation. There's different types of innovation that you might do. We have clients come in and say, well, we'd like some innovation, please. Yep, we can help you. Let's talk about what that actually means, right? So product innovation, I'll talk about this fix a flat. So you get a flat tire, you have to change a tire. That's pretty boring and difficult. There's a different way to approach that problem. You fill it up with this foam, fill up the tire with this foam, and away you go. So you've solved the problem in a totally different way. So you're kind of solving a different problem, and it's about understanding how broad you can innovate, how radically you can innovate. So you've got incremental innovation. We're not going to talk about that today. We're going to talk more about radical innovation, and that's something I think that does that at a product level. Higher level of abstraction, if we think about the business model, and we've had some talks today about lean, and everyone's sort of touching on the business as well and how technology interacts with the business. I think it's important to point out that we can do innovation at that business model level as well. And my view is that products now, because they're services wrapped in little packages, actually have a massive influence on the business model, and it's part of that. So it's more of a continuum and a relationship between these two, rather than are we doing product innovation or are we doing business model innovation or some separate thing like that. So products as touch points, right? So every day we're building things out of technology and software. My view is that we're building touch points as part of the broader ecosystem for the customer. That customer might be an internal user or an external user, whatever the case might be. And so these little packages of service are joining other services together, so we don't have to think about that thing anymore. Getting rid of that cognitive load, we can have higher level experiences and more meaningful things to be thought about. And so little products are popping up around the place. As I say, little packages of service that join things, you know, a lolly to a book. Doesn't make sense, but you know what I mean, right? So one final thing on products. Now, why do we talk about building technology things and software things as a product through that lens? Well, my view is that it puts a needed constraint and some scope onto what you're doing, just like time boxing in Agile. So that's important. Otherwise, these services could just turn into these huge projects that go on and never end, and who we're working with and who's it for. And the other thing, and if this is the only thing you take away from our talk today, I'd be very happy, and that is that it changes the conversation from one being about users and interfaces to one about customers and the business. And so speaking through that product lens aids that conversation to change. I think that's powerful for you interacting with the business.
So where is the starting point with some of these sort of innovative products? So a lot of the time there's frameworks such as the Jobs to be Done with Clayton Christensen. We've got Eric Ries in terms of Lean Canvas, trying to identify the problem. So going out and finding customers and looking at actually what are their problems, and then trying to really understand those so that you can define a solution that actually meets that problem. But the other side of it is that as innovators or entrepreneurs, we often have a great idea. We just have that fantastic idea that we just want to go with, and we actually sort of want to continue with that. But one of the things that we want to make sure of is that whether it's a problem or an idea, there is actually a latent need for that within the market. One of the things that the Lean Canvas, Lean framework talks about, this build, measure, learn, is making sure that you've actually validated that there is that latent need, because to the next point, life's too short to build something no one wants. How many of us have experienced working in technology, especially as a project manager for the last 15 years, that you pour your heart and soul into something, you're spending hours into like 4 in the morning actually delivering a project, and it goes out to markets and then it evaporates. There isn't actually any customer need for that product, and we've poured our time and energy into that, and especially as companies, we've poured our resources into that. And really, there shouldn't be a need for that. So an example of this is, how many people does this resonate with? So this is a quote from Whirlpool's Director of User Experience and Connectivity. So they were developing in the Internet of Things a connected washing machine that tells you when your washing load is done. Why is that useful? The Internet of Things allows sort of many great innovations, and having a connected washing machine may be useful, but the problem that they were solving in terms of telling people that their washing is complete, what am I supposed to do with that information when I receive that email? Is that, do I then contact the person who's staying at home telling them that their washing is complete? They would already know that. There's no problem that's solved, and as a result of that, there's been a massive misalignment between, yes, we've made maximum use of an innovative technology, but we've now got no customer fit. So we spent 6 months developing software and hardware products and manufacturing it, and nobody's actually buying it.
So an example of defining the right problem and then validating that before getting to solution is Bresic Whitney. So I worked on a project there where they're a real estate agent, and they see that there's some changes in the industry with the buyer-agent relationship, and they identified some key pain points that were stopping buyers from attending auctions and being able to bid with confidence. So the client's hypotheses are something we took on board, and went out there and listened to customers and validated at first that was that right, and then we put together a prototype to actually test that. So put a product in front of them, and does it solve the need? Does the need exist? And it was very successful. So the idea was price guides. If it's listed at $1 million but it goes for $1.5 million, that's very difficult. Not having confidence that it's going to land in a place that you can afford. Very difficult for you to do another task, which is to prepare for that auction with finance, and to prepare for that auction with asking for building reports and so forth, which allows you to bid with confidence, right? So instead of worrying about the price guide too much, we said, well, this other problem, the property reports, we can solve this one, and we think it'll solve the main problem, and it did. So 2 problems in conjunction was a problem, but we solved one and it solved the other. So what we did was gave them free inspection reports from a third party and allowed them to download it themselves. So they drove the process. Buyers would come to an open house, and then they would jump onto the web page, and the documents were there. They just had to sign up and blah, blah, blah. We can track them later and all that creepy stuff, But for them, it was a clear handshake, a fair handshake, in that they could look at the reports and then go on and bid with confidence. So we did that in about 8 days with a really dirty prototype, and it was really a successful time in validating the problem more than the solution, I felt. So what's going on here? So Ian and I have quite a different attitude to product. We bring different things. So I'm the design guy. I'm kind of throwing out ideas, loose, let's go wide. And Ian's really focused on...
So I'm helping shape that definition, because that's one of the challenges that I face, and that is you have a CEO or a CTO or an entrepreneur who's got these fantastic ideas, but now we actually need to limit the scope of that, really get some definition to that, so that we can say what we're actually going to solve, and then focusing on the delivery of that so that we can then validate, has that been successful in some way?
Yeah, so in delivery of any project, but in the lens of product that we're talking about, there are a couple of levels where you need that divergent thought, and the tension between that and the convergent thought is where the magic happens in the middle, right? And underlying that, we've moved well beyond waterfall. Underneath that, and what drives it along and helps us actually get to those outcomes, is the build, measure, learn loop. And we're all familiar with how that works, and that's underneath Agile as well.
So within the delivery context of that, it's around that speed of that loop that's really important. I think that's often gets forgotten, is that we want to get through that loop as quickly as possible. So it's around having those lightweight prototypes which have been driven by an idea, we have a prototype, we can get that out to customer, validate that idea. But even before that, it's around, well, are we solving the right problems that we talked about before? How can we frame that to the customer to see, is that problem something that they feel the pain of and they actually want to solve and are prepared to pay for having that problem solved? So one of the things that we want to sort of broadcast to a room full of CTOs or future CTOs is around, and it's some points that have been talked about before, is in order to sort of get to having real product innovation, you really need to invest in your teams within your companies. So we see a lot of sort of progressive organizations now doing things like having hackathons every quarter, having a hack day. But the challenge with that is it's really not enough time, and you're not necessarily putting enough resource and investment in making, like, actually delivering an innovative product. What it's really useful for is really identifying within your organization who are the people who really gel together, who have great ideas, who you're actually able to then discover people within your organization who are shining, who may not be able to shine within their existing role. So once you've done that, there needs to be the next step in terms of actually gathering those people together, ensuring that there is the right fit. So again, we talked about that tension before. It's like making sure that you've got the right component pieces within that team who have this skill set. So these T-shaped individuals, we talk about people with a deep core of a particular discipline, but they're also interested in other areas, because we don't want divas. We don't want people who are like, either there's the designer with the design stick and they make all the decisions about the design, or there's the technical director who's the only person who makes the decision about the technology. We want to have people who are able to have that discussion and that dynamic, because that's really where you get these innovative products and these new ideas emerging from.
So now we've got a team, but to actually get exploration going, and so what I'm saying is in that divergent piece, before we're consolidating and validating it, we need that exploration to happen. And that happens through actually allocating time and resource to nurture ideas. Now, the business wants a business case and, to know what's going to happen before it's happened. A culture needs to be developed that allows for that elbow room to explore. And I think a lot of the talks today have actually talked about culture, and that's fantastic. We've been set up very, very well to talk about some of this, and we're just stating some of the obvious, to be honest. So that's culture is kind of the thing. Allocate time and resources. Shelter from BAU. We talked about some of the previous talks touched on that as well. So the things that you would validate and measure the BAU against, with, don't apply in this exploration phase. You need some freedom there. So senior sponsorship needs to shelter you from BAU. Inside that space, a real focus on culture of learning. So you've got agile delivering and focusing on that. And often agile doesn't actually take the learnings and feed those back into the backlog. So really focus on like the lean learning as a grooming method into the backlog. And you'll be reframing the problem. Frame and reframe. We kind of touched on that already. Ian was talking about that. And with research. So in this space where you're learning and exploring, spending time with customers, learning about their troubles, there might be internal customers and otherwise, you're going to do a lot of qualitative research and get a lot of qualitative insights. They're not invalid. They're balanced with the quantitative. So you get some insights, it leads you down a path, and then you'll flip over and you'll look to converge and to do some validation around the quant. And marketing and so forth will say, oh yeah, well, it's not statistically valid and da-da-da, but that's not true. They work together, and it's a micro version of this dialectic tension that we're talking about.
So often Mike may generate some insights from direct customer research, and then that might help us identify early adopters for a particular technology, and then we go, okay, well, within our customer base, our existing customer base, who are those people who fit that demographic for those early adopters that we then want to specifically target to actually trial these new products with. So we then get quantitative, actual statistical relevance that actually we've got people we can sell this to.
Yeah. So as I say, in the divergent period, we're generating lots of ideas. And so there's a number of ways to do that, specific mechanical ways to do it. You can employ some of those. You can employ hallucinogenic drugs. I don't suggest going to work on that, but it just talks to the idea of what you're doing. You're expanding boundaries and you're generating lots of material to work with. So the idea is lots and lots of material. Don't fall in love with one idea, and don't judge too early. So keep it all open. Be loose.
So we have all of these ideas, and this is often the challenge that a lot of organizations face. That they may have set up sort of an ideation sort of framework, and they're pulling in all of these ideas from different people within the company, or they've had a lot of feedback from customers around what they should do with their product. You actually need to find some objective criteria around what you're assessing and choosing those ideas. So using frameworks like having a portfolio level Kanban of actually making active choices around these are the things that we're going to take off from a conceptual stage, and we're actually now going to invest some time. And the reason why we're going to do that is because of these items. So we use things like sliders to understand, okay, is it a business value that we're actually sort of looking to achieve? Is it a customer value that we'll actually see that direct customer value? Is it actually mitigating a bit risk, or is it enabling us for a future, like, so that technology can be built on top of that? And that we talked about that before in terms of like, trying to articulate some of the technological reasons for it, like delivering a particular feature, maybe as an enablers for developing future products. So there may not be an immediate customer benefit from that, but it might enable us for future. So you've got to try and articulate these ideas, and especially as you've pulled this team together, because you want the team to understand why you've selected that idea so that they've all got buy-in in terms of progressing it. So using different MVP types. So we talked about before is like things like the problem interviews, like getting to the root of this, where you can actually say, have the discussion with the customer to understand and explore how painful that problem is. Things like, very simple, is like actually just doing the pitch of the product before you've even built anything. Like we use things like product in a box. So literally your DAS soapbox, highlight the key product features on that and actually present it to the customer and say, would you buy this given these features? And then also understanding like the pricing, what is the customer actually willing to pay for that product? Because then it identifies to you how much effort you should be investing in that product. If it's not something that a customer is willing to pay a lot of money for, then why would you spend a longer period of time actually investing in that and pulling together a bigger team? And this talks about the test and retest. So continually reevaluate, set up hypotheses. So we had a discussion around that before, that actually you can validate with that and decide whether you're going to persist or pivot. So this talks about like holding your nerve to things that you want to do. So sometimes within a product, so it's this persist or pivot, you may not get that like concrete validation right up front, but what you want to do is be actually creating learnings that you can then make like decisive actions on. So as a product manager or a product owner, like sometimes you may have to hold your nerve and like justify that to the business, but you have some data to actually back that up and say the reason why we're persisting with this is because we have some validation which proves we should just actually work a little bit more.
BAU metrics. Okay? Just don't apply them.
Yep. So on BAU metrics, so to Mike's point before, it's just like, again, if it's a brand new idea, and especially if it's a disruptive idea, you can't take your existing business model or your existing product idea and frame it within that context. At least not initially. That's a problem that you're going to get when you get to a scaling model. You actually want to first of all make sure you've got this problem solution fit, then the solution market fit, before you actually start injecting these BAU metrics into it for that scaling problem, when hopefully the product really takes off.
Great. Mike, Ian, thank you very much.
Thank you.